If you're looking for another angry, profanity-laced tirade about how much modern Star Trek sucks, well, you're not going to get it here.
Geekville Radio.
Welcome, citizens of Geekville. This is Seth, a.k.a. Zandrax, the Mayor of Geekville, and the host of Geekville Radio. And we are dusting off the cobwebs once again here in the Geekville Radio studios. I know I've been off the air for a couple of months, but we are back. It is March in the year of our Lord 2026, and this episode is going to be devoted to Star Trek. This is an idea I've had for a while, and this will be the first in what I have tentatively called, because I can't come up with anything better at the moment, my case for whatever. So this one would be the case for Star Trek. Since Star Trek has been in the news lately, if you're a fan of Trek, you've probably heard of the latest Trek series in the Alex Kurtzman era, Starfleet Academy. And there's been a lot of talk lately about how modern Star Trek just doesn't measure up to the classic era. You've probably heard the complaints, seen debates online, probably even participated in a few yourself, like I have. But, like I said at the top, before you brace for another angry rant about what's wrong with current Trek, let me stop you right there, because that's not what this is about. I will address that, but I want to try something different. I'm going to try stripping away as much opinion as I can and make the case for Star Trek based on something more fundamental, and that's the actual structure and philosophy of what made classic Star Trek what it was, and why that matters. Gene Roddenberry envisioned something genuinely different with Star Trek. Most science fiction depict some negative thing in the future that happens and mankind has to deal with it. Gene Roddenberry didn't do that. He depicted a positive future. And that sounds simple on paper, probably too simple, but this is what many people may not realize, even if they're fans of the show. Classic Trek is, by its very nature, much more difficult to write because of this core premise. Think about it. Practically every trope, every cliche, every easy storytelling shortcut found in science fiction is not there in Star Trek. There's no nuclear holocaust. There's no World War III or global civil war or any other catastrophic war devastating Earth. There's no dystopian society where the heroes fight against an oppressive system. There's no corrupt government conspiracy for heroes to uncover. There's no alien invasion threatening humanity's existence. There's no need for currency, and therefore there's no greed to drive conflict. Thanks to replicator technology, they've eliminated hunger and starvation. The common cold was eradicated, and there's no cataclysmic event that wipes out countless lives and serves as the convenient backstory. All of those narratives, all those devices, they're gone, off the table. So what did Trek do instead? It presented something radically different for its time, a true meritocracy. And if you don't know what that word means, I don't blame you. It's a lot of syllables. But in Roddenberry's future, people were judged purely on their actions and their character. Unimportant and, quite frankly, boring things like race, gender, and sexuality just weren't part of the character. It was unimportant to the evaluation of a person's worth or capabilities. Lieutenant Uhura is a perfect example. She became the communications officer in one of the top vessels in Starfleet because she was good at her job, not because of some diversity initiative or quota system or any other program like that. She earned that position through skill, competence, and dedication. And the show didn't need to explain this. They didn't point that out. It simply presented her in the natural state of things in a society that had moved beyond prejudice. And it wasn't just about race. Consider Lieutenant Chekhov, a Russian. This wasn't some minor detail. When that character was introduced, I want to say it was the second season, 1967, 68, whenever, the U.S. was smack dab in the middle of a Cold War with the Soviet Union. These were two superpowers with the nukes pointed at each other, engaged in a space race, fighting proxy wars around the globe. The threat of mutual destruction was a reality. Gen Xers like me, who remember the 80s, that fear was real. There was the thought in the back of your head, like you were just going to walk outside one morning and up, here come the Russian ICBMs. Nice knowing everybody. Hope we get our MXs up to fight back. Nice knowing you. There was a TV movie the day after that depicted a nuclear holocaust. But in Trek, it depicted that we made our peace. Chekhov was on the bridge of the Enterprise, not as a defector, not as someone who had to prove his loyalty, not as an enemy who'd seen the light, just a skilled officer doing his job alongside his crewmates. No one questioned it. No plot point made about it. It was just how things were. And that was a powerful statement about what humanity could become. So what did classic Trek focus on when it came to stories? Since there weren't any wars or oppressive societies, it dealt with moral dilemmas, ethical questions, potentially gray areas where there isn't an obvious answer. The show explored philosophies, examined faith, tested values, but here's the key. It did this in a way that made all sides think. It presented ideas, contrasted them, and let the audience wrestle with the implication. That, in my book, is genuinely progressive. And I don't mean that in the political sense that the word has taken on in recent years, but the original meaning, moving forward, advancing, evolving in thought and understanding. I don't like getting political on my shows, so I won't do it here, but that meaning of progressive, actually getting better, learning each other, learning more about each other, understanding how people think, that's not a left wing, right wing, up wing, down wing, center wing, whatever idea. I think that is something pretty much everybody could agree on would be a good thing. So let me give you an example of one of these stories. It was a first season episode of The Next Generation called Symbiosis. The Enterprise D encountered two species, the Ornarans and the Breckians. The Ornarans are suffering from a plague, and the Breckians provide them with a drug called Felicium that treats the symptoms. The two planets have been locked in this trade relationship for generations. But here's the twist. Dr. Crusher discovers that the plague was actually cured generations ago. The Felicium isn't medicine, it's a narcotic. The entire population are drug addicts, and the Breckians know it. They built their entire economy on keeping another planet dependent on their drugs. They're planetary level drug dealers. Now, in most science fiction, this would be simple. You got your villains exploiting victims. The heroes could swoop in, expose the conspiracy, deliver some much-needed medicine or technology, save all those lives, roll credits. That's what Dr. Crusher wanted to do, and she was very adamant about it. And that is the conflicting dilemma there. You know Dr. McCoy would have done the same thing. Damn it, Jim, let me help these people. But Captain Picard didn't do that. Instead, he's faced with a genuine ethical dilemma. The Prime Directive forbids interference in the natural development of civilizations. If he tells the Ornarans the truth, he's interfering. If he provides them with the means to break free, he's interfering. If he does anything to stop the Breckians, he's interfering. But if he does nothing, he's watching an entire planet remain enslaved to addiction. So what does he do? He chooses a middle path. There are Ornaran freighters which are in need of repair, and the Enterprise could provide them with those repairs. But Picard refuses to do so, which means that the Ornarans cannot continue this drug trade. And Picard doesn't explain why. He doesn't give them answers, but he creates a situation where these two planets will have to figure it out themselves, where the natural consequences will force them both to confront the truth and find their own solution. And this is what makes it brilliant. There is no narrative in the episode to tell you whether Picard made the right choice. It presents the dilemma, shows you his reasoning, and lets you wrestle with it. Was his solution ethical? Was it cruel to let the Ornarans suffer through withdrawal rather than just telling them the truth? Did the Prime Directive matter more than the relief of this suffering? Picard literally had to think, leaving these people behind, and these people were believing that he was leaving them there to die. That's what he had to do. He had to walk away from people who believed they were dying. even though they could easily be helped? These aren't questions with easy answers, but that's the kind of storytelling that defines classic Trek. So now let's talk about the craft of writing itself. Writing stories that take place in present day is comparatively easy. Why? Because rules and limitations already exist. We all know that a normal human in present day Earth cannot run 100 miles an hour. We all know this, we all accept it. So if you're going to tell a story where a human can run 100 miles an hour, you have to explain what was done to that person to achieve that feat. Super soldier serum, genetic modification, alien technology, too many protein shakes, whatever. The world provides built-in constraints that create natural story structure. Science fiction doesn't have to follow present-day restraints, but it does require establishing clear rules. In any science fiction story, there needs to be guidelines for what is and isn't possible. Otherwise, there's no reason to believe what's happening in the story. If anything can happen at any time with no explanation or consistency, the tension goes away. The audience needs to understand what the boundaries are. Classic Trek had to set those boundaries and had to create meaningful conflict and drama in a world where humanity had largely solved its basic problems. That requires really good writing. It requires people who understand human nature deeply enough to find conflicts that persist even in abundance. Identity, purpose, mortality, the nature of consciousness, a first contact with fundamentally alien minds and cultures. These are harder stories to tell. And here's what really strikes me. Trek used to be written by people who wanted to better themselves and thought humanity could do better. There was an aspirational quality to it. The future wasn't perfect. There were problems. There's still conflicts. There's still moral questions to wrestle with. But the baseline assumption is that we, as a species, could grow, learn, overcome our worst instincts. However, now it seems like Star Trek is written by people who don't want to better themselves and quite frankly think everybody else should act like them. There's a difference between presenting ideas for consideration and preaching a predetermined conclusion. There's a difference between optimism about human potential and cynicism in familiar costumes. I'm not saying you have to agree with this, but I think it's worth considering what made the original vision special and what happens when that vision gets diluted or just replaced with something fundamentally different, even if it carries the same name. The case for Star Trek isn't about nostalgia. It isn't about keeping things the same. It's about recognizing that depicting a positive, aspirational future requires more creativity, more skill, more faith in the audience, because you do have to respect the audience intelligence. You need to do that rather than taking the easy path of conflict through dystopia and disaster. That's the legacy. That's what made it matter. Modern Star Trek has lost this focus and instead fallen back on these old tropes already done in previous science fiction franchises, quite frankly done better in those franchises. And Starfleet Academy is the latest and greatest example of this. Now, first, let me get this out of the way. On paper, Starfleet Academy was something that somebody like me has been asking for literally for decades. It was a new era, a new timeline, basically, with all new characters. This wasn't redoing the original series. It wasn't taking place in the same 24th century as most of the other Trek shows were. And that's something I've wanted forever. Let's do something new, a completely new environment, a new era, a new century. And Starfleet gives us that. So I will give them credit for that. But as we'll see, there's still plenty of criticisms to be had. As I mentioned earlier, Gene Roddenberry had strict rules when it came to Star Trek. Among them were no apocalyptic disasters, no hunger, and no currency. But what do we see in the opening minutes of the first episode of Starfleet Academy? The cataclysmic incident called the Burn, which somehow destroyed every single Starfleet vessel in the entire universe all at once. And people resorting to crime because they were starving and poor and couldn't buy food. 3 things right off the bat that go directly against Gene Roddenberry's rules. A few episodes later, the Klingon cadet catches a cold, even though it was made clear in the Next Generation series that the common cold was eradicated. This means somehow, over the next 800 years, medical technology regressed. These are not just nitpicks. These are examples of how writers not only do not understand Star Trek, they do not understand the basics of writing science fiction in general. Remember what I said about establishing rules? Throughout the show, we see glaring inconsistencies that break the internal logic of the universe. Beaming technology. We've seen throughout Star Trek that transporters are safe and can transport people instantly to various places. And even in Starfleet Academy, it's gotten to the point where they can practically teleport at will. It's a routine. It's safe. People beam back and forth to the ship several times throughout the show. Yet somehow, when captured by enemies, the characters conveniently lose the ability to do this. They're imprisoned on alien vessels or locked in holding cells. Apparently, the thought of beaming them out just doesn't occur to anyone. And no explanation is given for why this technology works flawless in all these other scenarios, but suddenly it becomes unavailable when the plot requires somebody to be imprisoned. There's also portals. There's an episode where a portal opened up between worlds and two characters grabbed one of the main characters and pulled him back through the portal. Now, we will skim over why no sensors went off, why no security cameras caught this, why nobody noticed life forms just popping in and out of the ship, or why the Klingon who saw this didn't bother to tell anybody. We'll gloss over that, because even though that's ridiculous in its own right. But think about the implications of that kind of travel for a moment. If you have technology that can open a doorway and instantly transport you anywhere in the galaxy, why would they need ships to track down criminals? Again, in the pilot episode, the main character Caleb is captured by the Federation and put upon a shuttle where he's supposed to be transported to wherever. But yet, they can open a portal. So why didn't his captors just open that portal, instantly toss him into the brig? Why would you need to chase somebody, put them on a ship, travel through space, when you could just instantly take care of the problem? It makes no sense. The technology exists when it's convenient for the plot, and it's conveniently forgotten when it could solve problems too easily. And then there's Sam the hologram Sam, whatever you want to call her. She can become incorporeal. And again, if you don't know what that word means, I don't blame you, but it means becoming less than solid matter, so things can just pass through her. Much like Robert Picardo's character, the Doctor, who, of course, was on Voyager for years. Now he's on Starfleet Academy. She's shown to do this multiple times. There's even a scene where blasters just pass through her. But somehow, later on in the series, she can still be shot by phasers and taken prisoner and bound. How? If she's a hologram who can phase in and out at will, how can she be shot? How can she be physically detained? Either she's solid enough to be constrained by physical barriers, or she's not. The show wants to have it both ways, depending on what the scene requires. And here's what really gets me. When you point these things out, when you raise these basic questions about consistency, it seems the show's creators and defenders gaslight those who bring them up. They'll tell you you're being too nitpicky, or you're missing the point, or you never understood Star Trek in the first place. They accuse you of not wanting the franchise to evolve or grow. Now, I've laid this out for a couple of minutes now, why those accusations are bullpucky. Asking for basic logical consistency isn't nitpicking. It's asking for the minimum requirement of competent writing. These aren't minor continuity errors or small details that only hardcore fans would notice. These are fundamental contradictions in the established rules of the universe that undermine believability of everything that is happening. I could go on with more examples, but I don't want to dwell on the negative. Hopefully, I've made my point. When a science fiction show can't maintain consistency with its own established rules, when the technology works or doesn't work purely based on plot convenience, it's not evolution or progress. It's just bad writing. And I'll leave with that. This has been Geekville Radio. There will be more of these Case 4 segments. I'm going to do one on Star Wars, going to do one on Doctor Who, might even do one on the world of pro wrestling. So more of these to come if you like what you heard. You can find us at geekvilleradio.com or on social media at Facebook, X/Twitter, and Instagram at Geekville Radio. You can find us all over Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Amazon, Spotify. Wherever you can find podcasts, you can find Geekville Radio and our plethora of other shows in the Geekville family, including Examining the Doctor, where myself and Mark Short talk Doctor Who and do episode commentaries. We have the Lesser Known Geek Hall of Fame. We got Classic Wrestling Memories, talking about the days of yesteryear in pro wrestling. We have Geekville Radio's Nostalgia Trip and Examining the Dead, where we talk the world of horror. Give us a like, give us a follow, give us a review. Let us know what you like. Let us know what you don't like. I always like feedback, especially when it's honest. So the only thing I ask is just be honest. With that, I'm going to shut down the power here in the Geekville Radio studios. We'll be back sooner rather than later. We got some catching up to do. We'll catch you folks in the next episode.
Geekville Radio is not sponsored or endorsed by any product, service, or media unless specifically stated. The opinions of the host and or guests are purely their own and do not reflect the opinions of Geekville Radio, its sponsors, or affiliates. Some media used by Geekville Radio is the respective copyrights of the owners, all rights reserved.